David Bennett.
I move that the question be now put.
Mr. Chair.
Let's say we're getting close. Claire Curran.
Mr. Chair, it's I speak in support of Part 8, tabled in the House by my colleague Phil Twyford, who's done a sterling job with his parts, his amendments to this bill. I also want to make reference to the good points that were made by Dennis O'Rourke about the relevance of this part, given that there's been a challenge as to the scope of this part in this bill, and that he made a very good point that if people can't afford to buy a home, then they must rent. And if they can't afford to rent, then what are their options? And it is our contention that it is a fundamental responsibility of the state to ensure that if there are people in our society who can't afford to rent a home, then there should be provision made for them. And I want to ask the Minister in the chair tonight whether or not he agrees with that concept, and if not, why not? And if he does, then why was he objecting to this part in the bill, which is ensuring and is ultimately in its new section 72A it has a provision that joint ministers must ensure that there is sufficient funding available for income-related rent places in Housing New Zealand in any year. And if there isn't, then what are the options of people if they cannot afford to rent? We've had a lot of discussion about different parts of the country. I want to take the discussion that's relevant to this part to the part that I represent, which is Dunedin, which is also happens to be the part where the Minister in the chair lives, to talk about the impact on people who are not able to afford to rent and are in state housing and currently have their rents in state housing under review, even though their income has not changed. And what is happening is those people that are being rung and threatened with being moved out of their state housing, and no new state housing is being made available. In fact, quite the contrary, state housing is being sold in Dunedin. So the people that are in state housing who still have the same low incomes are being told that they may have to move out of state housing into a private rental market where much of it is not safe and meets the definition of homelessness as put forward by Statistics New Zealand and is mentioned in this part of the bill as being uninhabitable. In other words, slum housing, unsafe housing, housing where there are children who are getting sick and ending up in hospital with respiratory issues, and the Minister knows this well. It has been said that 40% of Dunedin's housing is not not warm, not dry, and needs work.
Yeah, order. Same as before. Please keep the debate narrow on this amendment.
Mr. Chair, the relevance of this to the bill, to this part of the bill, is that if people cannot afford to live in housing that is habitable, they are being forced into unsafe, uninhabitable housing, which meets the definition of homelessness, which in places like Dunedin, where it is cold and damp and children are ending up in hospital and adults are ending up in hospital, what are the options? Which is why this part is so important and is so critical to ensure that there is that income-related rent as the backstop for in-state housing that is enabling more people who should not be in the private rental market in this kind of housing, should be staying in state housing. Today, Mr. Chair, I received a phone call from one of my constituents begging me to intervene with Housing New Zealand because her roof leaks, because there is mould There is toxic mould in the walls. Her heating doesn't work because the water has run down and has affected her heating. What will Housing New Zealand do about it? Nothing. They have lost their soul, but they've lost their soul because this government has no soul. And that minister should get up and tell us his views.
I just want to remind the House that the chair is the sole judge of time. And actually, I decide when there's a point of order taken, or if I make a ruling, how much time is added on, if any. And to have members rudely interrupt other members, both sides, while they're speaking, is just not going to be accepted. No, I know it wasn't. I know, but the member was looking at me down his nose in such an outrageous manner. Marama Davidson.
Mr Chair, first I would like to apologise to all the members that I've interrupted for jumping in to try and get my